All right, let's talk about the cortical lobes. There are four main cortical lobes that we usually talk about. Okay, they all have individual functions. First, I'd like to say something about the general function of the lobes. First of all, language. Language plays a part in all the lobes. If you think about what it takes to look at a document, to read it, and say to read it out loud, to know which word is which word, how a sentence is structured, how the tone of the sound should happen, um, whether you're going to raise your voice at the end or have an exclamation point, how you're going to move your tongue to speak the words, how you're going to move the air in your body to get the sound out. So, and then you're also hearing your words and adjusting accordingly. So, all of these areas of the brains are incorporated when we use language. We are going to focus on the temporal lobe here, the temporal lobe, this region right here. And we're going to say that it is one of the main areas for language. Okay, so when I ask you questions on the test about what is the function of the temporal lobe, language would be an adequate answer. You can't use language as an answer for any of the other lobes, even though, like I said, they do play somewhat of a part in language. Okay? The temporal lobe itself sits right here on the side, the lateral aspect of the brain, and so it should not be surprising to you, since the ear is right about here, that the auditory cortex is also located right here in the temporal lobe. I always, when I was younger, remembered temporal is close to the temple, and so that's how I remembered where the temporal lobe was, and based on where it's located, what it does, particularly auditory control. Let's drop down to the occipital lobe in the back here. The occipital lobe back here has one single function: vision, 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 vision. All right, so information comes in through the retina, goes up through the thalamus, and then on its way back to the occipital lobe where magic takes place. We have the ability to discriminate between lines and circles and turn them into understanding the facial expression of a loved one. So it really is fascinating science to study how vision actually, how these action potentials in the occipital lobe are turned into the perception of vision. Let's move on to the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe is right here. All right. There's this central sulcus that divides the frontal from the parietal. And again, I'm generalizing these functions and trying to pick out the most important ones. So the most important one is this little strip right here on the edge, right on the edge of the frontal lobe. It's called the somatosensory area, or the somatosensory strip. And that's involved in touch. So all the absolute sensation that you have of touch, whether it's in your fingers or your toes and your genitalia, all that sensation is fine-tuned in here. And when you practice something enough, if you learn how to play the violin or you learn how to play the guitar, something like that, more cells are dedicated to those areas that you're going to need as you practice. So more cells are dedicated to those fingers you're using to play the guitar or to strum a violin. Now, on the other side of this somatosensory strip is its workmate. It's called the motor strip. The motor strip is on this side right here in the frontal cortex, and this fine-tunes the movement. But first we have the touch, and then we have the movement. So think of taking that 40-foot jump shot I was talking about in class the other day. It's critically important that you hold that basketball just right in your hands at the edge of your fingertips. And you are coordinating the touch of the basketball as it's leaving your arms with the muscular movement to aim it toward the basket properly. So as you can imagine, these two regions, the somatosensory cortex and the motor cortex, work together. They're that third part that I told you, in combination with the cerebellum and the basal ganglia, that really fine-tune our motor movement. Now the last area to bring the cortex to cover is the frontal lobe. And this is, of course, the most advanced part of the brain and the most advanced of our species. It sets us apart, especially this prefrontal lobe up here. It has a lot of higher cognitive functions, executive operations, as they say. But I want you to focus on not only the motor area or the motor strip or the motor cortex, we use all those phrases interchangeably, but that this region is responsible for strategy and long-term planning. Okay, this area of the brain isn't fully developed till you're about 21, 22. The estimates are all over the board, but most people believe it's somewhere in the early 20s. That means this is the area of the brain that helps you decide what your major is going to be. Something we ask 18-year-olds when they enter college. Well, 18-year-olds don't have this part of the brain fully developed yet, so that seems like a pretty silly question to ask them. Strategy, long-term planning, what am I going to do with my life? What are the best choices I can make? This is also the area that is affected by drug addiction. The area that says, oh yeah, I guess I should pay rent, but I'm going to take this money instead and get this fix. Okay? Very poor strategy and long-term planning with people who have addictions. Finally, the last piece of this. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are two peaks in the suicide rate. One is in the elderly age group, which is more of a quality of life sort of issue for them. But the other peak is somewhere between 13 and 19. This age group varies slightly. 13 to 19. Think about that. That means this brain area is not developed. So these people go through perhaps a crisis in their life, which isn't uncommon, unfortunately, right? But they can't see that this is just one bad experience that they will get over and they will work through. And instead, they might do something drastic because this part of the brain can't get them through that. Anyway, these are the cortical lobes. Please know their functions.